what it says in this Chas Hobkirk book, I think it was it's in the 1850s. He writes about this site. He's actually from this area there. Hobkirk, in his History of Huddersfield, first edition, it says 1859 to page 53 and 54, describe this mound. Rising out of an extensive plain is a round hill of considerable height and nearly a quarter of a mile in diameter. On its top, the sides of which are extremely steep and covered with a dense wood, up to the very summit. The top is quite bare of wood and under cultivation from its peculiar form. The wood got the name from roundwood, though some call it the Warriors. Various surmises have been made respecting its origin. In form, it most resembles a tumulus, but its immense size is against such an opinion, unless we suppose it to have been the burial place of the warrior slain in some great battle. This is not, after all, very unlikely, as since there are records showing that a fierce bloody war was waged in the neighbourhood by its Prince Edwin in repelling the incursions of Caldwell the Briton and Penda the Mercian. Again, it may have some connection with, although scarcely would have been the site of, the small Roman townmen. Mentioned by Dr. Richardson as near Kirkeaton, yet we confess there seems to be little to favour such an opinion. Then, how again it came to be planted with trees on all sides, whilst on the top is particularly bare of them, it's quite an enigma. So that's basically what he wrote about it anyway. In my opinion, this is my own opinion, I've got two different opinions on it. The first opinion is that it actually, if you look at the map, if you look at Old Oswestry Hill Fort, there's a kind of shape to it, and it's got a point at one end pointing in a certain direction. And they're both shaped and pointing in the same direction, although Old Oswestry Hill Fort is not as high. It's only about 26 metre high, but the area on the top is a lot larger, although it's nothing like, Maiden Castle size. I think that it either could have had sides around it similar to Old Oswestry or Maiden Castle, those like up and down, kind of like big waved mounds all around it. And it got dug out, or it didn't need them around it because it's kind of like in a concealed valley, and because it's even Hobkirk notes that it's similar to a tumulus in shape, but more like a hill fort or a cross between. So it could have some religious significance, like some kind of. There are a lot of unique sites, that are one-offs, like Stonehenge. It could be religiously significant to a tumulus, but to go on top of. And the thing with Castle Hill is that it is shaped like a big long barrow, but had a village on top of it. And to do with the location of it on the island, where it collects rainwater in the hills and then turns into a river and then goes to the sea. The thing is with the place is it's right exactly in the middle of the island, more or less from top to bottom. It's midway up. It's more like centralised. I mean, it would be a good place to meet for, anyone on the island. Like if all the druids were to meet somewhere from the whole island, it would be a good place for them to go, really, like all from Scotland. They've got all those recumbent stone circles and so forth. And the thing is, the long barrow shaped forms are kind of significant. The thing with the long barrows, with like West Kennet and Hetty Pegler's Tuft and, all the other ones, a lot of them you can go inside, and it's now been confirmed that, West Kennet Long Barrow was open for a long time and in use, If they were like Bella Snap and other sites, if there was some significance to all the long barrows, if they were kind of like smaller versions, you see, in Spain, the ancient sites and the cairns, they're all kind of like round shapes. If you listen to that Dr. Gail Higginbottom, who's like an expert on them in Europe, she says that the long barrow form, elongating the tumuluses, making them long form, is unique to England, really, or the British Isles. And what is that shape? A lot of the natural landforms make that shape, like the copse, and they're shaped from the weather, from the wind, from the weather, and from the glaciers and so forth. They're literally formed from the elements. It's formed from the elements. And we've got a lot of them in the British Isles. That's the shape of the land, the energies, the wind. It's literally carved out of the energies around it. So I think that at some point they combined, when there's evidence of the early burials in Africa, like the round-shaped ones, not far from where all the cave paintings are and things like that. So if they started having these cairns and chambers, which are, the thing is, that cave art in Africa, I haven't actually been there myself, but when you see photos of where are the places where you find it, they're like these kind of shelter places that are up against rock faces or cliffs, and a lot of them overhang. They're not necessarily in caves, but a lot of them are. There are all these like places that are good places to shelter, if it's raining or from the wind, when people would go to these places, because they were kind of places where you could have shelter and draw on the rock, draw on the rocks. Clearly, there's a lot to do with psychedelic experience as well. But obviously, when they start burying people, but then there's these places where they go to have visions and do the drawings. There's definitely something in the psychedelic experience with the spirit, because obviously you get spirits appearing and can communicate with the spirits and the ancestors and whatever you want to call it, part of the inner self or whatever you want to call it. And there's something about out-of-body experience and there's a near-death experiences where there's a communication. So, like in churches, they keep the remains of the ancestors, the relics of the ancestors close to them, like they're almost like precious, whether you want to put somewhere safe to store them or keep them, or not necessarily bury them. But when you are speaking to spirits, it's almost like speaking to the ancestors and the memories and so forth. So I think that, as they went up through Spain and through Gaul and so forth, something happened to the shape of these sites when they started to make them kind of like an elongated shape. And then you get things like learning about, the magnetic forces and, energies and things like that, which I believe in. The shapes of buildings have like a flow through them, which is more positive. Like everything has a positive end and a negative end, and things flow through things a certain way. But a lot of those sites were made for observations of the sunrise and sunset and the moon and certain celestial events and so forth. Howard Crowhurst's work's really good. He does all the alignments for them. So I think that from the distribution of a lot of the long barrow chambers, you don't really find that many of them right in the middle of the country. unless it's like, Bath's quite far inland. I suppose Cheltenham is, but it's still not that far from the River Severn. And I know Arthur's Stone is kind of quite in Herefordshire. It is quite sort of in the middle of the country, but there aren't that, unless they've all been completely mowed down by farmers. You don't really find that many of them throughout the Midlands and the centre of the country, and particularly not in our area. But we have got these hill fort, these big sites that have got dwelling on top of them, but they match this. Our sites here kind of match the shape of the long barrows, but people are on top of them. They're not small and not going inside them. Are the long barrows like a mini version of the copse? That are shaped out of the energies and the weather. And is it almost like they're kind of like miniature versions, miniature churches, miniature spiritual gathering places of the the bigger actual copse that you find like in the hills and in the Lake District and so forth? Because that, if you look at the botanical distribution, a lot of the, if you're thinking about like the Amanita muscaria and things like that, were mainly found by pine trees and pine forests. And if you look at the distribution of pine trees and pine forests, they're mainly where you get the hills or hilly areas starting to come up, but not necessarily right on the top. Like Wales, round by us, by the Pennines, Scotland, places like that, Dartmoor. And also the distribution and concentration of the psilocybin as well is in a lot higher frequency in certain places distributed around, things like that. And Wiltshire, to be honest, out of all the places, that symbolic mound at Wiltshire, that has got the least distribution of the, like the smaller magic mushrooms, for example, aren't in that much frequency of distribution there. And I don't know necessarily whether there was that many oak trees around there, although some parts of the country, you see, with the distribution of the trees, which affects the distribution of, the other things like sacraments and that, it was changing over time through like the different prehistoric periods. Like the island was covered in different types of trees. I've got some pictures that show like one time it's like, mainly covered in lime trees or ash trees. And then in another period, like most of the island's covered in oak trees or in certain areas. And it changed over certain long periods of time, it wasn't the same the whole time. That's quite interesting. I still think that the thing with our sites is there aren't any really close to it. The nearest there's one at Barwick and Elmet, which is North Yorkshire, which is a largish site. And then the other one that is near is over towards Barnsley way. And for some strange reason, there really aren't that many round by us, but when you go on the south coast and around, Bristol, Bath, Worthing, Exeter, all that area, they're absolutely dotted everywhere. There's loads. And obviously Scotland's got quite a lot of sites as well, and Wales and Ireland. But for some strange reason, either they were all obliterated by farming or there just weren't that many. I think that the hill forts that we know of, I think they were more like the cities and, like the equivalent of what we've got cities now. And some areas of the country just had a lot more kind of cities and other areas didn't really have as many. But that doesn't mean that there was not as many people there, like, villages and so forth. It is kind of a unique sort of location where when you kind of see the valley and the significance of once you get over the Pennines, I mean, it's nothing like as huge as Scotland, but in Scotland, some of it's so high up that there isn't actually really that much growing there really anyway, because it's kind of above the... there are certain sweet spots when it comes to altitude where it's just the right altitude, not too much altitude or not too low altitude as well. So there's all those things to take into account as well. But our area, in a way, it's been really, really spoiled and rubbished. At the same time, they kind of pretended they were celebrating it. they put up like the big Emily Moore transmitter mast, which was like the tallest mast in Europe, kind of like sculptured a bit like sort of some sort of big wizard tower. But at the same time, they built on top of one of the sites and banged the Imperial Chemical Industries next to it. So it was almost like, a backhanded slap in the face, really, which is kind of like a bit upsetting. And it definitely doesn't really get any mystical... It doesn't really get any mystical recognition or vibe, anything like, West Kennet or Avebury or Glastonbury or anything like that with the Arthurian legends. Yet we have got these very unique and kind of mystical sites, but the locals aren't really that on that wavelength. I don't know what it is about our area of the country. There's definitely a certain feeling in the south of the England, like a chilled out kind of positive kind of vibe energy. Not that our area doesn't have positive, happy people. It's quite windy on that Castle Hill place, There's a lot of strong winds on it a lot of the time. Maybe that kind of symbolises the forces, that form these hills and so forth, and constantly blowing, the constant conflict. It's almost like the needle in... I see the Castle Hill site, which is higher up, near here, that it's almost like, it feels like, the needle in the water, points to the north, but it's moved by the magnetism, it is moving in at a certain point, But the other site that I'm wanting to concentrate on, that's kind of hidden in the valley, kind of like hidden down. There's all that, Tolkien had something to do with our area because he was a professor at Leeds and he had a friend, Haig, at Huddersfield. And the intro to Haig's book on our dialect is written by Tolkien. And he mentions, he makes loose reference to these sites like storehouses and stuff like this. So... maybe there was something going on with the sacrament. If there was something going on with anywhere where you could harvest or collect sacrament, then there could be potential where the authorities want to suppress that, or even the church, or even the history or knowledge of it. Going back to the whole kind of, in Africa, with all those cave paintings and rock art, we know that the psilocybin mushrooms that grew there, like those cubensis size ones, were quite big, but they were a lot harder to find because they only grow like on dung and stuff like that. Whereas when you get to our area, the psilocybin mushrooms, they're a lot smaller but more potent per weight, but you've got to go collect them all, and it's seasonal. Maybe they did collect them all and then distribute them out to all of the other chambers around the islands for ceremonies at a certain part of the year. Maybe it was part of the Druid culture, That's my kind of hunch. I'm not saying that's true or not, but that's like my gut feeling about it anyway.